Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pushed back against growing pressure for a humanitarian pause in the nearly month-old war to protect civilians and allow more aid into Gaza. Today is Saturday, November 4th, 2023, and this is the Dunkley Report. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pushed back against growing pressure for a humanitarian pause in the nearly month-old war to protect civilians and allow more aid into Gaza. Netanyahu insisted Friday that there would be no temporary ceasefire until the roughly 240 hostages held by Hamas are released. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made his third trip to Israel since the war began and reiterated American support for Israel's campaign to crush Hamas after its brutal October 7th attack in southern Israel. He also echoed President Joe Biden's calls for a brief halt in the fighting to address a worsening humanitarian crisis. Weeks after ordering northern Gaza's 1.1 million inhabitants to evacuate south, the Israeli army is intensifying its bombing of the area that stretches to the wetlands of Wadi Gaza in the Central Strip. Israeli soldiers are also battling Hamas militants just north of Gaza City. It's the start of what officials expect to be a long and bloody invasion that has already pinned down hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who remain in the north. Residents say they are trapped in hell. In the aftermath of one airstrike this week, a neonatal nurse spotted the bodies of her two young sons while dealing with the flood of dead and wounded arriving at her hospital. The Supreme Court has agreed to decide whether a ban on gun attachments that allow semi-automatic weapons to fire rapidly, like machine guns, violates federal law. The justices said Friday they'll hear arguments next year over a gun bump stocks regulation the Justice Department implemented after the 2017 Las Vegas mass shooting. Federal appeals courts have come to different decisions about whether the regulation defining a bump stock as a machine gun comports with federal law. The justices say they'll review the Biden administration's appeal of a ruling by the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans that invalidated the ban. A Marine Corps veteran who served as a politically appointed State Department official in former President Donald Trump's administration, has been sentenced to nearly 6 years in prison for attacking police officers during the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. Federico Klein declined to address the court on Friday before U.S. District Judge Trevor McFadden sentenced him to 5 years and 10 months in prison. Federal prosecutors say Klein repeatedly assaulted officers, urged other rioters to join the fray, and tried to stop police from shutting entrance doors during a fight for control of a tunnel entrance on the Capitol's Lower West Terrace. The judge in Donald Trump's civil business fraud trial has ordered attorneys in the case not to comment on confidential communications between him and his staff. Judge Arthur Engoron's written order Friday came after Trump's lawyers pressed their complaints about a clerk in the former president's civil business fraud trial. Engoron threatened serious sanctions for any violations. Trump's lawyers have been pointing out that the judge's principal law clerk gives him notes during testimony. The state lawsuit accuses Trump and his company of deceiving banks and insurers by exaggerating his wealth on his annual financial statements. series of lawsuits challenging former President Donald Trump's ability to run for his old job raise the question of what, exactly, is an insurrection. A rarely used section of the Constitution says no one who swore an oath to the document but then engaged in insurrection against it can hold higher office. Liberal groups are citing that in an effort to keep Trump off the ballot in Colorado, Minnesota, and other states. They argue that the January 6 attack against the Capitol was an insurrection. But there's a debate over how to define that word, or even which definition to use. Legal settlements could provide local and state governments $50 billion to fight the deadly U.S. opioid overdose crisis. What could that look like? One Ohio community is already doing many of the things advocates say should be considered. Hancock County funds harm reduction efforts, such as a needle exchange and naloxone distribution. It also has a recovery community center, a drug court intended to get people into treatment rather than jail, housing for some people in recovery and aggressive outreach, to help people with substance use disorder navigate their options for help. The new president of the Boy Scouts of America plans to reverse the trend of declining membership and improve safety programs as the organization emerges from bankruptcy following a sexual abuse scandal. Roger Crone, a retired businessman and Eagle Scout, was named Friday as the new chief executive of the 113-year-old youth organization, replacing the retiring Roger Mosby as the top administrator. A federal judge in March upheld the $2.4 billion bankruptcy plan for the Irving, Texas-based organization, which allowed it to keep operating while compensating more than 80,000 men who filed claims saying they were sexually abused while in scouting. Sheryl Crow and Olivia Rodrigo kicked off the 2023 Rock Imp Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony Friday night, and Missy Elliott closed the show more than 4 hours later with a roof-shaking set, as the hall celebrated a strong representation of women and black artists: Chaka, Kate Bush, Soul Train. Creator Don Cornelius, The Spinners, and DJ Kool Herc were also inducted in a celebration of funk, art rock, R&B, and hip-hop, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary. Country music was represented by Willie Nelson. Punk had Rage Against the Machine. The late George Michael repped pure pop, and Link Wray defined guitar heroes. Today's news was reported by the Associated Press. This has been the World News for Saturday, November 4th, 2023. Thanks again for joining us at The Dunkley Report.